Hello, dear friends. Today I am speaking to you from San Luis Obispo, and I'm actually in a hotel room, which is pretty rare for me. This is on my long walk from Canada to Los Angeles. This is, I believe, the only hotel room that I have stayed in. So it's unusual, and it's an interesting point of transparency. I don't prefer to stay in hotels. I rarely ever do, but occasionally I do. And so here I am in a simple hotel room in San Luis Obispo. It's the last few days of 2024. And this video here is sharing all of me. This is many areas of my life in which I want to have more transparency and truth and integrity. And so I'm going to be sharing a lot of different aspects of my life. Now, one thing I just want to remind you all, in case you have potentially forgotten, this, for me, this coming into truth and transparency, this isn't a black and white thing about lies. This is a much deeper thing about just coming into a deep place of inner truth. And so to get the most out of this time together, if you haven't already, please watch the introduction to this series where you'll learn what my intentions are. I want you to know that I'm not doing this from a place of guilt or shame. So many people, when they think about being truthful, that's what they think, that they're going to be doing it from a place of guilt or shame, right or wrong, good or bad, blame, punishment. None of that is relevant here whatsoever. This is my heart singing with freedom, my heart singing for the desire to bring my life into a full state of transparency, because I think it's so healing, because I think it's so important for our leaders, and I aim to be a leader. It's because this is at the heart of who I am, to be living in the deepest state of truth, in alignment, in integrity. And so that's where I am coming to you, and that is where we are together, and I'm grateful to be on this journey together. So let's dive into some of my truth and transparency here. Some of what I'm sharing today is very lighthearted and casual, and I'm going to say even comical, and other areas definitely are areas where I have held some pain. I'm feeling light at the moment, and I don't remember everything we're going to talk about today. I have an outline, and we'll see what we come to, but at the moment I'm feeling light, and I'm going to be starting with some things that I feel healed around and very transparent and open around already. So first, in this moment, I kind of smell. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is because so many people comment on social media and say, this guy must be smelly, from not taking showers and instead bathing outside, and my deeply natural personal hygiene. And so sometimes I do smell, and right now I do. Right now I am washing my clothes all by hand, and I haven't been using soap as much because when I'm washing in rivers I don't use soap. And recently my friend Julie recommended using ghee as a body oil, and I used ghee, and the ghee smells. It's on my clothes and I didn't get it all off, so I kind of smell right now. Lavender is my key for refreshing up that smell. I would like to acknowledge that in the earlier years of my life, I lied a lot. I was very self-conscious, very embarrassed of who I was. So I'm talking about, when I don't know when it started, 5, 6, 8, 10, through middle school, through high school, into college. I grew up low income without a dad. There were 4 of us with 3 different dads. And I just was very embarrassed of being poor. And my mom and dad were both kind of hippies. And there were some other hippies around, but also it was a very Catholic dominated town, and we were Jews. I remember even in college, my girlfriend at the time learned that I was Jewish after months of dating because she met a family member and they said, "Are you Jewish too?" So just acknowledging that there was a lot of embarrassment, and I don't know if I would say shame, but definitely a hiding of who I was. And I was recently talking with my sister, and She told me that when I was in high school, I basically wanted nothing to do with my family. And looking back, I realized that's the case. And it was helpful for her to jog that in my memory. And I really wanted nothing to do with my family when I was younger, because I just wanted to make myself who I was, and I wanted distance and separation. I didn't like my family at the time. That was self-love issues, really. I love my family now. I love every one of my family members. Something from my childhood that I feel the absolute most mourning over still, I feel some mourning over this, is that my sister loved to sing, and I would often tell her or demand her to stop singing. I was annoyed, I was frustrated, and she was just being herself, exploring, finding herself, expressing herself. And I look back at real pain. I feel real pain thinking about me stifling that. We're about 1 year apart, 2 years apart. So I feel some pain around that, and that's pain that's healing. Her and I have talked about it. And I feel pain around just not having been a more supportive brother, especially to my sister, but to my brothers as well. And to my mom as well. We did not know how to be there for her, and I definitely mourn over that. But I've had an incredible amount of healing with my family, with my mom, with my sister, with my brothers, and feel in a very good place, and I'm happy to share that. So here's a few things. My teeth. Many of you noticed that they're very white. So I do not use any tooth whiteners. It's such a common question, why are my teeth so white? Now, I just want to acknowledge I did use tooth whitener in high school, college, and probably stopped a year or two after college. So at least 13 years ago. But I want to acknowledge that in the past I used tooth whitener, and one of the reasons I want to acknowledge it is because I didn't share that with people then. I was embarrassed. I was hiding it. Along those lines, I want to share a couple of areas where I've been involved in the Western healthcare system, because primarily I'm involved in the Western healthcare system as little as possible, and it's very little. I've been very, very minimally involved. But I want to share these because, in a sense, they're not in alignment with my choosing to just be so much a part of the earth and being able to say I don't need this technology in order to exist. So I got LASIK eye surgery when I was about 25 years old, and actually at the time I considered it the best money I'd ever spent. It was a big deal for me. I had a vasectomy when I was 25 as well, which is a very simple procedure. I paid for both of those with my own funds. Now, an area where I struggled was I was probably about 27 or 28. So over 10 years ago, I had an accident with my bicycle where I almost lost a toe. One of my toes was dangling off. And so I went to the ER, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have health insurance, and I remember the first thing I did was went online to see how much this might cost. I was with a Canadian guy, and he said, "We got to go to the hospital." And so I did, and that was paid for by taxpayer dollars because I registered for free healthcare, and so that was paid for by taxpayer dollars. And today, that's not something that I would do because I have chosen not to pay taxes. I have removed myself from a lot of these systems, and this is something I share more in depth in my video on health insurance, age, and death, and I talk about these things, but just want to be transparent about that. And then another way that I've been involved in this technology world is that I have done some tattoo removal sessions. I have a tattoo on my chest that I've been removing, not because I'm embarrassed of it. It's a sun and a wave, but I just want a blank canvas. It doesn't represent me anymore. I got it when I was 21 years old. And so I've done 7 sessions, and I've spent about $1,000 over the last couple of years. So it's not an in-service usage of my funding, and it's getting involved with technology that isn't necessary on this planet, and it's not putting my money into places that are contributing to equity and justice and sustainability. So I just wanted to be transparent about that. One other aspect of Western healthcare, which dates back to before I had removed myself from it at all, was when I was in university, and I took a trip to Mexico, and afterwards I was really itchy, and I researched it, and I thought I must have scabies. I was pretty sure about it. In fact, I think that some other people had, I'm almost positive, some other people knew they had scabies. And so I thought, I definitely have scabies. I went to the doctor, it was at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, and the doctor told me, you don't have scabies, and he was so certain of it. And I walked out of there, just taking his word. Well, it turns out I did have scabies, and I had scabies for, I think it was like 9 months before a doctor told me that I indeed did have scabies. And so I know that my dear friend Jamie, if I recall, got scabies from me. We were selling educational books back in my summers, and we actually shared a bed. We were living very simply, and I'm pretty sure, if I recall, he got scabies from me, and he was itching a lot, and it was a huge pain for him. I didn't struggle so much. That's why I was able to have it for so long, and I certainly wasn't transparent about it. I don't know if I ever told Jamie that I was the reason, or other people that potentially got it. So at the time I would have been very embarrassed, but now, I'm not. It's something that happens, and I did my best at the time. Okay, now this is an embarrassing area. This is an embarrassing area, and I'm just gonna say sometimes I poop in Sometimes I poop in places that I really shouldn't be pooping. And I don't like to use the word should, but it really is not a place that I should be pooping. So I want to go back a little bit. In 2013, on my bike ride across the country, I was not using any water from on the grid, so I was not using any flush toilets, along with a lot of other things. I was living off the grid. And so what that meant is pooping not in flush toilets, pooping outside. Now that can be done in a totally hygienic fashion, in a totally respectful fashion for others, with no issues whatsoever. I could have carried a compost toilet, and then, which is basically just a bucket with sawdust, and then emptied that into other people's humanure piles, or burying that in a place where I was very confident where it would not be detrimental at all and would actually nourish the earth. However, I didn't know what I was doing, and so I pooped in places where it was not right for me to poop. And I remember I was in Pennsylvania, and I woke up and I had to poop so bad. I was staying with someone, and I went to the backyard, and I actually just was like, what do I do? I was about to poop myself, and I lifted up a brick in their garden, pooped, and then just covered it with the brick. And I have to imagine they knew it was there. So I've pooped in numerous unideal places. On the cover of my first book, Dude Making a Difference, there's this white PVC tube, and I learned about that in Colorado, and it's what rock climbers carry so that they don't poop on the rock wall. And so I would poop in paper bags and put it in that tube, and then I could bury that later. But all I needed was a simple bucket compost toilet system, which I know now, and I could have done on my bike tours. Still, that's challenging, but I could have done so much better. Now, that has not ended. I have pooped in unideal places even on this walk, and it's a difficult one. And yeah, our society is not set up in a way that makes it easy for somebody who doesn't want to be playing into the waste of the flush toilet system. And so generally I've carried a trowel with me, and I've buried it, and it's been totally in alignment with the earth and with humanity. But there's definitely been times that I've pooped that just have been not ideal, or where I didn't bury it. I also have pooped in the ocean. That started when I had diarrhea swimming back in the day, back when I was in university. Actually, I think that might have been in Fiji or New Zealand or Indonesia. And so I pooped in the ocean while I was swimming, and the fish came up and ate the diarrhea. And you never want to poop in water. If you're gonna poop, you always want to poop on land, and you want to bury it deep enough. And I've pooped in water many times, actually. And the reality of all of this is that we've all pooped in the water. The whole flush toilet system is so much a fallacy in so many ways. The reality is that millions and millions and millions of our poops end up getting flushed right out into our rivers and oceans and lakes. So I have directly done this, but the reality is probably every single person watching this has as well. I won't talk about it too much more, but that's just the truth. Now, this is an area that this summer, when I realized I was coming into full transparency, I was speaking with some people and I realized I was going to share something very embarrassing. And what that is that I have pooped in this pot. And the reason why, this is my cooking pot, my eating pot. Right now, there's citrus in it. So I have pooped in this pot and then I have eaten from it. Now, of course, I've fully cleaned it where it's only mental, where this thing has no bacteria in it. There's no safety issue. But the reason I pooped in the pot is I was in the Everglades camping and I had diarrhea, another diarrhea experience. And I didn't want to, the no-see-ums were so strong outside the tent that I was not going outside. And so I had to poop in the pot while I was in the tent overnight. And that was maybe the only time I've pooped in the pot. Maybe I have another time. But the part that I realized that I have to, not have to, but am choosing to share is that I have made food for other people in this pot. So I have pooped in this pot and I have made tea for others or food for others in this pot. So some people would just be absolutely angry, I don't know, just pissed off, frustrated. They would be, they'd have a lot of judgment towards me for that. But I want to say again, it's just a thought. The pot's completely clean of any bacteria. And so it's actually a non-issue. It's just a mental thing. My jar, I have peed in this jar and other jars that I have drank from. And, of course I clean it. It's a non-issue, but it's, just an interesting thing. So one other note is that I have pooped my pants numerous times. I think we all have done it. I know we have as children. And then if we live to be elders, most of us probably do. But the reality is I think every adult has pooped their pants. It happens. I have pooped my pants many times over my lifetime. I probably will again. And so I have pooped my pants. Now, if you want to learn more about safe pooping and when it comes to composting poop, you can learn about that at robingreenfield.org/humanure. It's something I'm actually very passionate about. Breaking free from these systems that are so destructive. The flush toilet seems totally mundane and non-destructive and sanitary, but the truth is that it's absolutely not. So if you want to learn more about that, you can at robingreenfield.org/humanure. Okay, next, I have grazed from the bulk section of food co-ops and grocery stores many times, whether it's fruits or chocolates or the little bars. I have probably over my lifetime eaten, probably not a couple $100s worth of food from the bulk sections, but I have indeed grazed from the bulk sections many times. Now, it's often food that's going to waste, the stuff that's scattered, but occasionally I will have a snack from food that I didn't pay for. Now, a lot of times I won't weigh my containers and I'll just pay the extra weight. And so, there's a good chance that that's totally offset, but it's just an honesty and I probably will do it again, but I really minimize it. Another thing is that I haven't paid for campsites always. I've paid for many of the campsites I've stayed in, but there's many times that I've stayed in campsites and not paid. And sometimes it's because I've had very little money. Sometimes it's because I guess just didn't want to. And, I want to share that nothing's black and white. And my whole way of existing is to contribute far more than I take to humanity, far more than I take to the earth. And I've dedicated my life to this. And I don't operate in fully linear transactions. I don't always follow the rules. I live by earth code, and my earth code respects people, but first and foremost comes the respect to the earth, to the land, to the plants, to the animals, and to humanity. And so I don't live strictly by rules and laws. And so that plays a role in the way that I choose to interact. Now, You could certainly see a lack of ethics in grazing or not paying for campsites. We all have our own systems of ethics, and certainly there's been times when I felt, not right about it. And so I'm not going to put any more explanation or detail into it, but just to be transparent that that's something that I do sometimes. In 2019, I did a year of growing and foraging 100% of my food, which most of you probably know about, and I practiced deep transparency with that. On the website, I listed every meal that I had, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 365 days, every ingredient, every plant and animal and fungi. Very transparent, very detailed on my website. And I also made a list of rules of what I would follow for this self-imposed adventure, experimentation. And the whole guideline around what is foraging is a gray area. What is foraging? Humans have interacted with this earth in a way where there's not too many areas that are not touched by humans. And I dive into this and more into the Food Freedom book, and I share about this on the website. But the area where I had the most struggle with being fully transparent, or the gray area, was harvesting from fruit trees in people's yards. Now, I was very transparent about this, in that my main way of doing that is fruit trees that are neglected, fruit trees that people don't even, harvest the fruit from. They didn't plant it, they just happen to live there. Fruit trees that are basically existing on their own on someone's property with access from the sidewalk and things like that. I have no qualms with this whatsoever. No issues with it whatsoever. It was just this definition of what was considered foraging or not. And of course, my qualms don't exist because a lot of times I have communication, and I also am able to read the situation. If there's hundreds of apples on the ground and many rotting mangoes on the ground, I have no issue with harvesting without talking to people. But if I have any question, I do my best to talk to them. But there's been times when people weren't home, for example. And so I've definitely harvested during that time when, it was potentially food that they would have eaten. Now, there's a lot of feral banana stands, where you have racks of bananas that you can harvest that are really wild, that nobody's harvesting from. Or feral is a better word, more accurate word. And so then there's this gray area where that was the area where there were times when I harvested a banana rack on a property, like a big property, where the most likely case scenario, from what I can tell, is what they weren't going to harvest it or eat it. But there were times when I didn't know. And there was one banana rack that I harvested down in South Florida that was starting to, there were some that were so ripe that they were starting to fall off, and that was hanging over into an alley, and then I harvested, and it was some of the most tasty bananas I ever had in my entire life. And those may, there were some times where I may have taken bananas or other fruits where people would have eaten them and they would have perceived it as stealing. And so that's a gray area, and it's an area where I don't have a perfect practice and would like to hone in that practice more. In my 2022 30 Days of Wearing My Trash campaign in Los Angeles, I lived to a very high level of integrity of following through on what I said that I would do. Now, in 2016, when I did Trash Me, I had a very clear rule, and that was that I had to wear the trash everywhere that I went. If I left the house, I had to be wearing the garbage completely. Now, and I did that. I held through to that in 2016 in New York City very well, with a couple exceptions of taking it off to go to the bathroom or sitting a couple of times towards the end. However, in Los Angeles, there wasn't much easy public transportation, and it was so spread out that I had to be in cars a lot in order to be going to the different neighborhoods and walking. And so I may have done what I said that I was going to do, but what I know is that I really struggled feeling like I wasn't wearing the suit always. I was in the car a lot, and we would sit in the car a lot, and then I would put the suit on generally when I was out and about, but not in the car because I couldn't even get in the car. There was a struggle with full transparency of how to word it. In New York City, it was easy. In Los Angeles, there were gray areas, and I would go over to people's houses and not wear it as well. I think I'd wear it to their house, but I could take it off when I got to their house, which was not what I was originally planning to do. So I was soft on myself with that and didn't live up to my highest integrity. But of course, every piece of trash was the real trash. I carried through with a very high level of integrity. It was just the question of if I was wearing it as much as I said. And a lot of times it's difficult to come up with exact words that explain the situation with full transparency, but without going into such a level of detail that 99% of people are totally not interested in, where you lose people. So being fully transparent is a skill, and it's very much a challenge in this society that's so based on bite-sized videos and captions and shortness, because transparency takes real time, as you can see from this series. It takes real time. Okay, I have ordered items both from Amazon and Walmart.com for myself and for the nonprofit that I work with, Regeneration, Equity, and Justice. And it always hurts when I do. And I'm sure a lot of people would see that and they would say, "What? You did what?" I mean, I speak out against this type of corporate control and this just ease of consumerism that creates so much destruction. And so I'm just being fully transparent that sometimes I order things from Amazon or Walmart.com or other places. It's not very common, but I have done it, and I'd like to say I never will again, but the odds are that I probably will, but perhaps not. So sometimes I watch pornography for masturbation, and this is a very tender area to talk about. There's so much shame in our society around masturbation and porno. I have zero shame around masturbation. Masturbation can be a nourishing, healthy, wholesome thing to do. Now, growing up, there was so much shame and hiding around it. And still today there even is. Like, even just saying the word masturbation right here with you right now, I've started to say it more, so it's less like I'm less apprehensive around it. But to just publicly acknowledge that I masturbate is, it's tender. And then the fact that I still watch porno for masturbation sometimes is, that's really tender, because the pornography industry is one of such, there's so much exploitation and so much lies. It's so far from a industry of transparency and truth and integrity. And so I watch porno sometimes, and I don't really have like much judgment or shame over it, but it's something that I have a very hard time being transparent about. So there's obviously something there, and it does not align with my integrity. And one day I know that I will shed that completely. And I've made great strides during my first year without sex and romance. I think I only watched once in a year, but after that year I have more, and I have lost the balance that I had, and still have a fair balance, but occasionally I do. And when I say occasionally, it's probably a few times a month right now or so. Now, many of you know that I have a sweet tooth. That's something that I've shared with so many people, and I've absolutely shared that I struggle with not eating too much, that if a box of cookies is in front of me, I might eat way more than I want to in that moment. I really, really struggle with self-control. If I have a pint of ice cream, I'm probably going to eat the whole pint. And the brownies, the cookies, the sweets. I have the sweet tooth. But I also just struggle with overeating in general. I often know that I've eaten enough and continue to eat. I often eat to the point of my stomach hurting. And I've made it a very long way in the last years. During my year of growing and foraging all my food, I made a substantial breakthrough, I would say, because I could only eat what I grew and foraged. And so there was a year without chocolate and most sweets. I just had my honey and my coconuts and things like that. I know that I lack the ability, the self-control, and a lot of people would be surprised by that because they see how much self-control I have in certain areas of my life. But in food, I often lack in self-control. A few areas that I would like to share is I buy pints of Ben & Jerry's sometimes at gas stations or grocery stores, and that's just not in alignment with my integrity. They're delicious, I enjoy it, but it's not where I want to be. It's involved in systems of creating trash. Although I really love Ben & Jerry, the humans, and consider them to be friends, the corporation is owned by Unilever, which is a corporation with an incredible amount of control, and that overall most of their products are a part of exploitation and destruction. And I'm putting my money into that system. I'm taking part in that system. When I'm practicing wholeness and completeness within, sometimes I fall for eating ice cream, which is based on me not having wholeness and completeness within. Me eating based on cravings, things that I absolutely don't need. So there's foods that I buy at the grocery store that are just not in alignment with my integrity. And it's a small fraction of the food that I eat, but it's there, and I want to be totally transparent about that. I have thought numerous times that I bought my last pint. And here we are. I've bought a few pints on this long walk. Now, an area that I had largely shedded was buying kombucha at the store. I've made kombucha for most of my life, or not most of my life, but since I moved into this lifestyle. But on the road, I buy kombucha sometimes, and I had mostly stopped, but I have been again some lately. And the reason why is because shipping water and beverages is one of the most destructive things that we can ship. It's water. We have water almost everywhere. And so when we buy things like alcohol, especially lighter alcohols like beer or sodas, we're just shipping water around. And you know what? One of the banes of my existence is semis on the road. And when I'm buying kombucha, I'm contributing to those semis being on the road when I'm the one cycling and I'm the one walking and I'm the one struggling with that noise. And so I have no issue with buying things at the store, but beverages are just so for me outside of my integrity. Okay, now I mentioned that I really struggle with my sweet tooth, and so an area that I have definitely been hiding and have not been truthful is that sometimes when I stay at people's houses, I get the sweet tooth and I can't resist, and I eat some of their sweets without asking. I'll go into the fridge, I'll go into the pantry, and I'll eat the sweets without even asking. Sometimes maybe they're gone and I can't ask, or maybe I just do it. And now most of the time they're probably totally cool with it, but there's been some sneaking around it. I've definitely eaten from fridges and pantries without asking and sort of sneaked around it. I remember my former partner back 10 years ago, she called me a chocolate vampire, and there were times where I ate all the chocolate and didn't save any for her. And yeah, so sometimes I just get that sweet tooth and I can't remain in my highest integrity, and that has resulted in some sneaking around with the sweets. Now, this is something that I've talked to with very few people, and this is a very tender area to talk about because, one, I would see a lot of people would substantially judge me on this, not see me as the full human being that I am, but two, this is an area of showing a real lack of self-control, which is integrity, and that is that I have had the habit in the past of overeating and then puking to remove the food from my stomach. And so I want to share a little bit about that. I don't know when the first time I did it was, maybe in 2020. And now there were times when I would overeat at night, and maybe it was earlier than 2020, I don't know. But there were times when I would overeat at night and then I would sleep very poorly because going to bed with a really full stomach, I sleep very poorly. So there were a few times at probably potlucks or things like that when I said, I'm going to sleep really poorly now because I'm so full. So I said, it's in my best interest just to puke. And so I did that sometimes. I don't know how many times. And it was, doing it on a rare occasion. I really don't have an issue with that at all. But something that started to happen was there were times when I would be at the dessert table and there would be all these cookies and such, and I would eat. I would not have control, and I'd eat more than I'd want, and then I'd say, dang, I've eaten more than I want and I'm full, so I'm just gonna puke. And then I would say, well, since I'm gonna puke, I'm gonna eat more. So then I would eat more sweets knowing that I was gonna puke. And I don't know how many times I did that, maybe a couple dozen, maybe a few dozen over some years. And I think maybe I was doing this in like 2021, 2022, maybe 2023. And I don't know if I've done it this year. It's something that I more or less have totally removed from my life. But it was certainly almost a bit of a habit for a little while there. And some people would label that bulimia. Now, I haven't looked into it, but I think most people who have bulimia, there's a lot of body issue and shame and things like that. But, I would say if I continued down that path, it could have been in that realm. And you could certainly call it bulimia if you wanted to. I don't know. I don't have a label for it. But that's very vulnerable to share. Just imagining how most people think of me as this person of such integrity, and to imagine me gorging on sweets, knowing that I'm going to puke them up, that's pretty low. And I will say that in our society, we just have very black and white rules around what you do and what you don't do. And as far as most people, just the fact that I ever had puked up my food intentionally would potentially take issue with that. Again, I don't, but the integrity with the overeating and it being a habit, very much an issue. And I'm glad to get that off my chest and just say it as it is. Okay, over the years, I have used things in people's homes as I've been staying them without asking. And this is definitely vulnerable to share. I have used other people's towels to dry off because they might have offered me a towel, but I didn't want to use a towel just once or twice and then waste the water and the detergent to wash it, and maybe I didn't have a towel with me. So I've used other people's towels. And just full transparency about that. It's been a long time, but I have used another person's toothbrush without asking. That's just not cool. You just, ask, but don't just do those things without. And so that was sneaking around. And it's been also a very long time, but I shaved with another person's electric razor. And now this is hard to share, but I have shared I shaved my pubic area before with a friend's electric razor without asking. So, this is just some real transparency here. This is just some things that I've done, and this is an area where I definitely feel, embarrassed to share, but it's the truth, and I'm just sharing it. And again, with the whole gray area, with this whole black and white, like people being afraid of germs and everything, it's like a toothbrush. You can use a toothbrush, dip it in vinegar or alcohol, wash it. It's more of a concept of the concern of sharing a toothbrush. It can be totally non-transferable of any issues whatsoever. And the same with an electric razor, of course. And, when using a towel, it's like you're already clean. You're at the cleanest state. But the sneaking aspect of it, the not asking, is the area where it's lacking integrity. And then I'm glad to come into a place of transparency with this. In one of my videos, I talk about my struggles of managing a team and my real challenges around communication, and where I've not been able to live up to my compassionate desires, my goals for compassionate communication, and I dived into that. I want to touch just on a few things that I hold within me and that I just want to put out there, be fully transparent about. In about 2019, there was a guy who I felt very concerned for our community as far as the safety of the young women, and I did the best that I knew how at that time for the safety of women in our community. But looking back on it after some years, I realized that my compassionate communication skills were just not there yet, and that there was damage that was done that wouldn't have had to have been if I was more of an effective communicator. In 2022, I actually have an aunt who canceled me. And, this is an interesting one because it's like, this is their truth as well, but it's my, they canceled me, and this is my truth as well. it's like vulnerable to share, but she's an aunt who was married in. And they canceled me because I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton and because I didn't get vaccinated for COVID, I believe, and then other misalignments. The truth is that we're overall pretty darn aligned, but in the polarized society that we live in, that's the way that I was viewed, and I was, removed from her life, canceled. In 2022, one of my closest friends, we had been friends for a couple years, maybe not 2 years, but someone who was very close to me, and also we were in this mission together. After staying with him for some time, he decided that I wasn't up to his desire for integrity, and that really there were just some unmet needs and a lot of emotions around it. And, he decided that I wasn't his friend anymore. And that was really painful for me at the time, really painful. At the same time, I know that I really tried hard to really have a quality communication and have a deep connection, and but some of his needs weren't met, and part of that was because of my consistent being too busy, too overwhelmed with stuff. And I think I know I neglected the friendship, and he didn't get the care that he desired, and didn't so I won't dive into it. But, I take responsibility for my part of the communication and still having growth to do, and it was very painful. Now, for me, working with people, it's a very clear, simple thing. Not dating anyone who's working for me. That's a simple way to prevent issues and to make sure to be operating from a place of integrity, and that is something that I've followed through completely on. Now, a little bit of a tricky area is in 2022, I was dating someone, and then they started to work with me and the nonprofit. And, I knew that probably was not the idea that was going to make the most harmony and flow. And it turned out that it resulted in a lot of challenging communication and a lot of struggle. And it wasn't a sound decision as far as the operation of the organization and me being in the highest integrity. So again, I would never date someone who's working for me or the organization, but I'm still, the idea of being in a relationship with someone and then they work with the organization, they start working with the organization, I think that can be very effective and very powerful. And I certainly support that. But for me, I knew it wasn't going to be I knew that it really posed a potential challenge for the flow of the organization and myself. And certainly that is what ended up happening. And a lot of beauty, a lot of joy. I don't look back and say that I would have done it differently, but that was a big struggle. On this long walk, I have had a couple of my hosts, the people that I stayed with that welcomed me into their home, that were really not very happy. One shared that she perceived me as being rude. Another felt not only that they weren't connected to me, but disconnected. And this came down to me being overwhelmed, overworked, having too much on my plate, and not being compassionate, not being present, not being mindful in the moment. And hearing this feedback was very painful. And so I guess what I'll say is that I'm not as compassionate as I'd like to be. I still have a lot of work to do. I still have relationships that struggle because, I take responsibility for me, and then others take responsibility for themselves, but certainly I play a role. And there's just plenty of conflict still in my life, plenty of struggle still in my life, and I've come a long way, but I'm just not as compassionate as I'd like to be. And for those of you out there who see me, in videos compassionate, it's much easier for me to be compassionate when speaking in a controlled situation directly to you, for example, or it's one-on-one. But I struggle with too many things going on at once or groups, and so I'm just not that skilled. I struggle with compassion, and so some of you might experience me at some point and be like, whoa, he's not what I thought. Now, a lot of you, I've met so many of you over the last years where you say you're exactly who you are online. But others experience me and they're like, man, he was not nearly as loving and present as I would have thought. And sometimes people need to see that I have a lot on my plate and I'm doing a lot, but sometimes I just don't live up to my standards. And I still have a lot of work to do. Now, one thing an area where I really want to be transparent, because this just gives a window into my life and it helps to relax things a little bit so people can see me and understand me. But I was recently with my teammate Daniel in Monterey, and he worked with me. We worked together in 2022 in Asheville. He was producing videos. We were doing videos together. And he said that when the camera would turn on, he would see me turn on in a way that he questioned my integrity. Now, this is particularly when speaking about topics of compassionate communication and universal love and being in harmony with humanity. Not when I'm talking about sustainability and these things. He experienced me in full alignment, but he would see a difference in the way that I spoke about these topics and the way that I actually interacted with him and the team. And that was really important feedback, really, really important feedback. And my dear friend Brent gave me similar feedback in the way that he saw me interacting with some of our hosts or people we would meet versus what I would share on social media. So this was a big realization for me that I still have a lot of work to do. It was painful, but I didn't say to myself like, oh, I'm a lie, it's a sham. I said to myself, okay, I see. I need to catch up to my mind as far as my actual ability to do these things. And that may mean pulling back on talking about it until I can embody it more. Or it may mean just more transparency of sharing my struggles and the depth of that. And that probably the answer is both and other things. So some people, they experience that and they just extrapolate it out to say, wow, it's all a sham, it's all a lie. And that's just not true. I am deeply, deeply, deeply dedicated to my mission to humanity, deeply dedicated to living in truth and integrity and transparency. And I will continue to struggle, but I will continue to bring myself forth in a level that honestly I feel thrilled about. I am so happy for where I am, so grateful to have had the skills to come forward in this way. And we'll be continuing to make great growth and progress. Now, I have committed to doing my work with the nonprofit without being paid for it. I do my work because I get paid in the contribution to others, in clean air, fresh water, improving of the quality of life of the world around me, in being a part of this, in all of it. That's how I get paid. And so I have held through to that very strongly and very effectively over the years, where I don't make money off of my social media, my media, books. 100% of my media income is donated directly to nonprofits. And all of my work is Creative Commons, so I don't own any of it. Now, my net worth right now is about $300 plus about $3,000 worth of stuff, so about $3,300. I've been keeping detailed transparency on my net worth since 2016. I have vowed to earn less than the federal poverty threshold for life. I've been fully transparent here, and you can read that transparency at robingreenfield.org/transparency. I've struggled with this, using my life to sometimes raise funds for nonprofits. For example, I did a commercial for Acer Laptop in 2022 that raised $32,000 for my nonprofit to do service for Earth and humanity with. And I write about the struggle with that, and so I'm fully transparent and open with that there. And I welcome you to dive into that transparency with me. I had this gray area in the summer of 2023 that I was not happy about, that I did in sort of a time of struggle. And that was, I was basically running out of money. I needed money. I don't use a bank account myself. I don't have any financial accounts, online financial accounts. I just use cash. And so I did barefoot school and foraging school in 2023, and I was transparent that I was going to be earning money from them, and that part of the reason that I was doing them was to see if I could make my little bit of a living that I need from teaching, rather than from having to, seek out speaking gigs, which is what I did in the past at universities and such, and also to try to work with just cash. However, I did the programs through the nonprofit, which is what I wanted to do, but I paid myself through the nonprofit. And in my ideal scenario, I would not pay myself through the nonprofit, and my intentions is not to do that again. So I earned $9,000 in 2023 that came through the nonprofit. I believe all of that came through the nonprofit. It's all on the website though. And if you want to read, I wrote an article called "Have I Effectively Been of Service with Regeneration, Equity, and Justice?" And I dive into some of the transparency there. And that's at robingreenfield.org/REJ2024 letter. So there's no issue with being paid by a nonprofit. I've just wanted to keep myself completely separate from it. And it's an area where I did not effectively do that. I want to talk a little bit about my relationship with marijuana as of late. I write in depth about my relationship to plant medicines, drugs at robingreenfield.org/plant medicine. I have a very positive, healing, nurturing, wholesome relationship with marijuana. It's been a very wonderful plant to work with. As a reminder, it's a plant, just like grass or mango trees or avocados or chestnuts, raspberries or blackberries. Marijuana is a plant. And so I have a very positive relationship with this plant, just like I do pretty much all plants in my life. However, as I've smoked some earlier in 2024, and then definitely some in 2023 and 2022, I definitely worked with it in a way where I was over smoking, smoking more than once in a day, sometimes smoking, more times in a week than I would have liked to, where it was sort of being used as a crutch, where I was trying to reduce my anxiety or just sort of escape. And where it wasn't fully in alignment. I have an ideal balance with marijuana right now. It's been a couple months since I've smoked marijuana. I've had a really beneficial relationship with it overall, but there's been times where it was out of balance. So if you want to learn about my relationship with plant medicines, I highly recommend reading that article. I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and vaccinations. So I did not openly speak my viewpoint, my philosophy, my stance on COVID in 2020. And so quite simply, I did not get vaccinated. I haven't been vaccinated for COVID, and I wasn't intending to. The only reason that I would have is if it prevented me from being able to be effectively of service. That was the only reason that I would have. And it hasn't. It hasn't affected my ability to be of service to humanity, so it has been a non-issue. What I want to do is just address that, because many people have asked me, and early on I didn't answer the question. And why? Because I was really afraid of being canceled. At that time, it was such a cancel culture. It was such a culture of just writing you off as this absolutely horrible human being. And so I didn't talk about it. And I've been wanting to talk about it. It's just a matter of time and energy and where I put my time into. But one day I will write more in depth about my relationship with the pharmaceutical industry, my thoughts on the pharmaceutical industry. And I do write about that some at robingreenfield.org/hygiene. But that's an area where I haven't been fully open that I would like to, but I'm going to save that for more in-depth exploration. But simply to say that the pharmaceutical industry is one of the most corrupt industries in the entire world. There's an incredible amount of censoring that has happened around it. There was a lot of concern that if I spoke about it, I would be written off by society and no longer able to be effectively of service, or that my content would just be removed and I would be ineffective as a messenger online. And so that's what prevented me. But I've always spoken about the pharmaceutical industry and will continue to do so because it's one of the most corrupt industries and the most exploitative industries in the world. Now, one thing that I want to acknowledge is in 2022, I believe it was, I did have a gathering where numerous of us got COVID. And so there was some spreading of COVID through that gathering. And one thing that was, that's very hard to share is that I was getting a ride back to Asheville and I had COVID and I really needed to get back to Asheville. And the person who gave me a ride was someone from, I believe it was a Craigslist rideshare, and I did not tell him that I had COVID. And so that was an area where I was very much lacking transparency and integrity, because your opinion aside about it, my philosophy and opinion aside about it, the thing to do is to be open and honest with someone in that situation, and I was not. I'm going to talk a little bit about voting, and I am eventually going to write a lot of my philosophy on voting and more on the political system in the future. I have just not made the time to do that yet, but I'm just going to be transparent about my voting. So my first time voting, I was about 18, which would have been in 2004. And I just voted for who I thought would be most beneficial to my mom, to help my mom out. And that was a Democrat. I don't remember who it was at the time in 2004. In 2016, I would have voted for Bernie Sanders. I very much was enthused about Bernie Sanders, but there was an incredible amount of corruption in the Democratic Party, and I did not vote in the election. I voted in the primary, I believe, and I was not sure if that vote was even actually counted. The primaries were seeming to have some real issues in the Democratic Party in that time. In 2020, I voted for Joe Biden, and that was the least joyous day of my adult life, or the least joyous act of my adult life. It was not something out of a desire. It was really because I really thought that the best thing I could do in that moment was to play a role in getting Trump out of office. In 2024, I did not vote. And I'm not able to vote because I no longer have an ID. That's a choice that I made. This experiment of not having any form of identification is more important to me than the ability to vote. I truly believe that I am of service to this humanity and that I don't need to be voting in order to be of service, and that actually by being largely removed from the political system, I'm actually able to be substantially more effective. Not saying that there's not benefit in voting, but I do believe that me putting my time and energy elsewhere is the most effective usage of my time and energy. So again, at some point I will write more in depth about my philosophy in voting, but I wanted to just be transparent about what voting I have or haven't done. In 2020, when George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, that was a big shakeup for me. I have been dedicated to equity and justice since the beginning of my awakening because it's all connected. The earth, humanity, all the exploitation, all the destruction, it's all interconnected. And so this has been very important to me from the very beginning. At the same time, it's like, you can't do everything without being so spread thin. And what the dominator society actually wants is for us to be spread thin. So I think it's one of their narratives of trying to get us to focus on every issue at hand. And that can be a great struggle. But for me, it's at the absolute core of my desire to be of service to Black and Indigenous communities. I really see it as one of the most important ways that we can heal as a humanity and that we can heal this earth. To embrace Indigenous wisdom, to embrace their past and their present, to embrace Black knowledge, and just to embrace a holistic approach to healing our humanity. And at the absolute heart of it, I think overcoming our separation as a human species is so important. And here in the United States, or Turtle Island where I live, the communities that I feel the strongest connection to be of service to learn from, to work with, are Indigenous communities and Black communities. And I put a lot of time and energy into that. Nowhere near as much as I'd like. And I still have a lot of work to do, but it's very much a focus for me. And in that, I want to share a couple of areas where I'd like to be more more transparent and open, and where I've had some struggles. So, around 2020, during that time, it was a time when I really was feeling pain inside, as many were, and a lot of white people were just feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of fear of not doing enough. And so much of that was definitely self-image. Now, for a lot of people, it was absolutely because they wanted to be a part of healing and part of the solution. But for just as many, it was just as important that they just looked okay themselves. And I just want to be honest that was a factor for me in my beginning to be more involved in this equity and justice, is that I was covering my own image. And to be a white privileged person at that time and not be doing anything was just a way to render yourself, not looked well upon by society. And so part of my action was me covering myself. Now, just with full honesty, that's only a small part of it. For me, it's really at the heart of my being as a human, as just a human being who cares about other humans and cares about the earth. But that affected me because I so deeply wanted the approval and love from Black folk and from Indigenous people. I just so deeply wanted the approval and love. And I needed healing too. We all need healing in these systems of separation and oppression. And so some of my support came from me really looking for healing and love myself. And if we are not knowledgeable of that, and we don't understand that, and we're not transparent with that, then there's a good chance that we're going to actually not be effective servants, and we're actually potentially going to cause more harm than good. With a lot of white people operating from a place of guilt or shame, they do more harm than they do good. So it's important to make sure that we understand ourselves. And I was definitely operating some from a place of just wanting to be loved, wanting approval, wanting connection, wanting my own healing, which is not inherently wrong, but just something important to acknowledge. Early on in my work in Indigenous communities, I was up at the Line 3 pipeline protest. And I remember there being a lot of just general not trusting me and having to prove myself. And that is completely valid. White people have come into Indigenous communities and Black communities and communities of color believing that they know what's best and coming in to provide their solutions and making things worse. The reality is that most of the problems that Indigenous people face today in this country are because of white people. And I'm not blaming white people who live today. I'm not saying that anybody's bad or good, but we have a real history that this country is founded upon the mass murder of millions, or hundreds of thousands at least, but millions of Indigenous people, the destruction of hundreds of Indigenous cultures, genocide, and the enslavement of millions of Africans, stealing them away from their homes to build this nation. This nation is built on an incredible amount of fallacies, of lies, of injustice, of destruction, and I want to play a role in healing that. And that's not me blaming anybody today, but it's very important that we acknowledge this truth. That is a truth of this country that we live in. Now, so I just want to acknowledge that mistrust in me, that lack of trust in me early on, is totally valid. I completely understand that. It was painful for me, and I knew that I needed to just build my trust by working. But I also want to say that some of that trust was probably, or lack of trust in me was probably accurate, because I was coming in somewhat of a wounded way, and I was seeking validation myself. And so in a way, there was an element of wanting to extract something from the community. Again, I was there for genuine purposes, but there was also me wanting to extract, which is the whole problem in the first place. And I was extracting, wanting approval, wanting love, wanting acceptance, wanting to be accepted by not just them, but the society as well, of people in this mission. And I'd also like to acknowledge that early on there was probably a small amount of virtue signaling. I was just learning how to speak about this, how to be a part of this more thoroughly, this movement, this movement for humanity. And so I didn't know the language that, and I was learning, and I didn't know all the emotions, and I was learning. It was challenging. It's a vulnerable place to be. And so early on, there probably was some virtue signaling, which virtue signaling is basically like, instead of having the actual virtue, you say things so that people think you have virtue. Now, the reality is that my objective is to live a virtuous life, and that's the majority of what I do. But early on, I can look back and I can see that some of my wording was just, okay, this is the wording that's being used, and I use that wording, whether or not I fully understand it. And overall, I'm happy with that. Learning another language is important. Providing respect and acknowledgement for people to be seen and heard and understood. Learning their terminology and language is very important. Very, very important. Because the dominator language is to say there's one way of doing things, one way of saying things. But all that to say is that, a lot of people have accused me of virtue signaling. It's actually almost always white people, rarely people of color, actually. And so, yeah, some of that, maybe people could sense some truth, that there was that discomfort in me, and there was a little bit of virtue signaling. With that being said, I'm glad to have come into a more place of comfort, and being here of service from a place of comfort and wholeness and completeness inside. And there's no virtue signaling going on today, and there will be no virtue signaling, I don't think, for the rest of my life. Now, when I started this series, I was planning on being fully transparent with my thoughts as well, not just my actions, but the things that I think. And I'm not quite going to dive into that yet, because that's just another realm. And this whole series has been very, very time intensive. Filming these videos while being on this walk, it's been a lot of work. I've put so much work into this, coming into full truth and transparency. Thoughts are a very important one, though, and one of the aspects that's most important is that there's a lot of people who feel a lot of guilt and shame around their thoughts, concerns that they're crazy, a lot of concerns of being accepted. And I think we need to more openly share our thoughts so that we see we all have thoughts inside that other people judge us for. We all have them. And, these are thoughts. We can't control our thoughts until you become fully enlightened, which very few of us ever will. So I have all sorts of thoughts. You watch horror movies and you see murder. So I've had thoughts of murdering people. You see movies where a family member has sex with another family member. So that thought has entered into my head of having sex with a family member. Do I ever want to murder someone? No. Do I ever want to have sex or anything like that with a family member? No, I never will. I have zero intentions of it. But these are thoughts that have entered my head. As a kid, not knowing about sex, you have all sorts of thoughts that enter your head. And so I'm just going to at least say that is that we all have thoughts. I've had so many thoughts that would be so embarrassing. And, two of them are ones that I just said. Like, I've had thoughts of punching people in the face. I've had thoughts of pushing old people down the sidewalk for no reason. It's just thoughts that enter my head. And a lot of that is because we live in a society that puts so much violence out into the world that it penetrates our minds. If we lived in a society where there was nothing of that in the movies and in the magazines and in the mainstream, then we'd have a lot less of those thoughts. So that's why it's so important what content we consume, what videos we watch, what we see on TV, what we read, who we spend time with, the environment we in. It's so important to reprogram our thoughts. So one day, perhaps I will dive more into thoughts, but I've already just shared a bunch of, those thoughts. All right, dear friends, we are coming to a close here on this video of just sharing all of me, sharing many things, and diving into truth and transparency. And so there's a few areas that I want to share. And these are all areas that I've had an incredible amount of transparency already, and truth, and a lot of healing over the last years, and that I've done in-depth writing already. And so I just want to share those so that you can dive into them if you'd like to. So first, I have a lot of racial biases. I am programmed by a very racist society that growing up, just so many racial biases, and I've been working a lot to overcome them. You can read about the article on exploring and overcoming my racial biases at robingreenfield.org/racial bias. And then I also have a lot of sexism, growing up in a patriarchal society. I've just got a lot of biases against women. And again, I'm dissolving so much of them, getting rid of them through deep practice and through reprogramming the mind, especially over the last few years, but for, many years now. But this is important stuff to explore, and I want to be fully transparent and open about my biases, because that's how we overcome them together. That's how we heal. That's how we grow. So on exploring and overcoming the patriarchy within me is at robingreenfield.org/patriarchy. Also, just to say, I have biases, against people who are fat, people who are have different physical abilities, people who don't have the application of a gender, or who are non-binary, people who are queer. People who are in a different class than me, people who have different education levels. I have so many biases that are deeply programmed into my mind, and I'm doing a lot of work to overcome them. It would be embarrassing to share all of them, but I've deeply explored that in these articles, and I welcome you to explore that with me and to explore your own biases. This is powerful stuff to overcome our biases and come together and heal as a humanity. As far as flying goes, that's an area that a lot of people have asked questions in the past. I've been fully transparent about my flying and how I've used flying only as a tool when I believe truly that the impact that I will have through taking the flight will be worth it. And I've gone through an incredible depth of transparency on my relationship to flying, and I don't have an ID, so I don't fly anymore, and I've flown very little in my more recent history. But you can read about that at robingreenfield.org/flying. I want to acknowledge that on this walk, I have burned my share of fossil fuels. My life burns fossil fuels. I definitely work to live very in harmony with this earth, but I still use transportation, and my life burns fossil fuels. I get into cars, and just being open and honest about that. My ego is something that I have practiced a lot of transparency with, and I won't dive into that much now, but just to acknowledge that I definitely operate substantially from a place of ego still. That plays a large role in my day-to-day. I'm working to dissolve my ego and have made a lot of progress and will continue to. And I request your patience as I continue to dissolve my ego and use it as a tool for humanity, as a tool for being of service to humanity. So my friends, I am so grateful to have been able to share all of this with you. Thank you for being here on this journey of truth and transparency and integrity with me. That was a lot. And I think if most of us were to observe our lives, we would see that we have a lot that we would like to be transparent and truthful about, and that we have a lot that we're guarding or hiding, a lot that we're ashamed of or embarrassed of. And so I see, this whole series has been multiple hours of me sharing, and it's more than I expected even, and it's a lot. And the reason it's a lot is because it's a difficult time to be alive. This whole society is set up, the majority of the society is set up to keep us from living in our truth and integrity and transparency. Our corporations, our governments, our politicians are not in transparency, mostly not in integrity. And if they were transparent, the systems would crumble. We would see the truth. And so I don't believe that the system wants us to be living in deep truth and in deep transparency and integrity, because then we wouldn't follow the status quo. We wouldn't fall for the societal norms. In the United States, we have 5% of the world's population, but we consume 25% of the world's resources. This is extreme. This means there's an incredible amount of exploitation and destruction and injustice and inequity behind most of our actions: the food, the water, the energy, the waste, the transportation, our money, financial system. behind most of what we do, the reality is that there's not much truth or transparency, and there's a whole issue of a lacking of integrity. If any one of us really dissects our life, we'll see behind the wall that has been built to keep us from seeing the truth, we're all living way out of truth, way out of transparency and integrity. And so, it's risky for me to share all of this because most people don't see that and understand it, but we're all in this together. We're all struggling in this way, and I am happy, I'm joyous to be here as an example of just being so open with the reality of my existence, the reality of our existence together. So, dear friends, I have a little bit more that I'd like to share, but the battery is just about to die, and I was supposed to be out of this hotel room 15 minutes ago, so I'm going to go. But I have the conclusion video where I'm going to share everything else and just bring a sort of a wrap to this whole series, and share a little bit more of myself and connect with you a little bit more. So I love you all very much. I'm so grateful to be on this journey together. I'm feeling a lot of lightness right now, a lot of lightness and a lot of compassion and gratitude for you. See you soon, dear friends.